Energy. Boars, trying to remember, and everyone help me here, right? But on the boar side, energy, there's a few studies, and I think most people would be comfortable saying that it's one of the few things that the boars really respond. So increasing energy, of course, it goes back to the feed intake at the practical level. It increases semen output, but the problem is you might make them too fat, and that's bad for the locomotor problem, right? Locomotor problems. So I'd say we are okay here from overall energy standpoint. Gill development, a few studies, right, from Dr. Jeff Valette, Dr. Dean Boyd, looking at that, at the energy and the amino acid. We can work with that as well. It's an interesting one. These gills, they seem to compensate, which is interesting. It's still a question mark for me a little bit, because we know that we can control better the finishing pigs. Are the gills that much different that they compensate? I have some questions about that. But we do have some recent studies on this area, okay? And I'll put amino acids, mostly, lysine to calorie ratio. I mean, amino acid ratio requirements, would that be different in gills? That's probably minor differences, I would guess, if any. All right, gestational energy. So that was part of my PhD. We really understand, was it the energy or the amino acids that were driving birth weight? At the end of the day, virtually didn't change the birth weight. There was a very minor change, was not economical, when you increase feed in general. But in that case, the energy was what was causing the increasing in stillborn. And drove, after Dr. Laurie Thomas' study, the point really drove home where she had a lysine dose response throughout the whole gestation period for treatments. And basically, when it comes to gestation, we know, right, we don't want a fat female, but we actually probably want a muscular female, if you will. So a little more amino acids is what we want, right? So instead of 11 grams digestible lysine per day, that is probably pushing the envelope. You probably want to be closer to 13, I would say, 12 and a half, 13, because it helps you a little bit of a stillborn. So bottom line, more feed or more energy, bad for stillborns. A little more amino acids, not a lot, because it gets expensive very quickly. It does help with stillborns. So I'll put here energy. I think we are happy with that. Lysine, we're happy. The only asterisk here, and I would challenge everyone here on this class today, is that the NRC model in late gestation, when you measure the nitrogen balance, it's going to show, well, these females, they need more amino acids, but it does not account for the fact that this female prioritizes fetuses in late gestation. So what is that nitrogen balance graph telling you? It's telling you that if you give more amino acids, this female is going to put more muscle, right? And again, we do have recent evidence that it does help a little bit stillborn, but it's not like you need 18 grams of lysine in the last third of gestation. That'll be, that's not helping the producers, okay? All right, energy and lactation. A few studies here. Again, always like to see a few more, but a few studies here. My comment here is be somewhat careful when you add too much fat and you go above a 3% added fat diet. Again, it's going to depend on your basal diet. I'm talking corn, soy, bean meal. But what we saw in 2 studies is that when you do that, the intake goes down because you're adding that fat, and the total daily intake goes down after that 3%, okay? Energy and nursery. I recall one study, but I'm sure there's more when it comes to energy or added fat. The one we did was late nursery, and they respond okay. As you remember, as you know, the first 2.5%, the animals respond better than the second 2.5%. So 0 to 2.5, they respond okay. 2.5 to 5%, they don't respond as much, okay? And also remember, you don't want to be adding fat in that first 1 or 2 diets in the nursery for the pig. You might add because it's a pelleted diet, okay? All right, so let's see what Ben said here. What's your view on restrictive feeding 1 week prior to farrowing, but increasing fiber intake with the likes of bran and lucerne chaff to keep? I don't know what lucerne chaff is, so you can let us know. I'm not familiar with that ingredient. To keep sow from constipation, but lower stillborns from full stomach. Restricted feeding 1 week prior to farrowing. Okay, I wouldn't restrict feeding. It depends what you mean by restrict feeding too, right? If you're feeding 4 kilograms a day in the last third of gestation, as I've heard a few farms in Europe, then you're restricting to maybe 2.5 kg. Again, depends on the the stickler nutritionist is going to say, okay, 4 kg or 2 kg of what, right? When I say these numbers, I'm talking corn soy diet. If your diet is 10% less than a corn soy, you discount by 10%. In that case, you increase the feed intake by 10%, right? You just need to be careful, I think, Ben, on the last few days prior to farrowing when it comes to, you don't want to deplete that female from glycogen reserves, right? So there's been a few recent studies from Dr. Kia Gurley, Dr. Peter Thiel back three years ago or so, Dr. Trey Kellner as well, on the fact that if you bring that window of time between the last meal and the farrowing, as you reduce that, it seemed to help a little bit with stillborns, okay? So that's been an interesting finding and consistent out of 3 studies, I'd say, so that's helping stillborn, okay? When it comes to the, constipation, I know, right? A lot of folks like to feed fiber around the globe for gestating diets, for gestating sows. There's one review on that topic, and after a few cycles, it seems to help a little bit, like 0.1 in born alive. It might improve a little bit the feed intake. But again, you need to run the economics, right? Most places would be more expensive. And I even learned recently, which I didn't know, I thought corn was expensive in some areas of Europe. But I learned it's cheap, but folks don't use that, right? So it's an interesting one, but also always careful with the mycotoxins as well. Final word here in constipation, I like to think more about water intake rather than, I need to have some fiber for constipation, okay? That's my take, but looking forward to you guys' comments. Okay, full feeding in finishing really depends on things like carcass premiums and ultimately income over feed cost calculation in each marketplace. Good point. Europe different than US and Canada. Yeah, it's a very good point. Clarence, neat lops, restricted feeding helps with better return to estrus during the dry period. Restrict feeding. Yeah, so what Neat's saying, dry period, he means gestation, right? Restrict feeding, if you don't make them fat, that means they're going to eat more in lactation. And that's one of the few things in pig production that is black and white, right? I would bet $1,000 in a given study that as you increase the intake in gestation, it's going to reduce the intake in lactation, or even a production system. As you bring that gestation down, the gestation consumption down, lactation is going to go up. Is one of the few things in pig production that is like clockwork, right? When do you talk about energy? Do you talk about dietary energy, metabolizable energy, or net energy? A question from Dr. Miranda Smith. Hi, Dr. Smith. Happy to have you here today. I'm talking in general, but most of the recent studies we will be working with net energy, right? But all these things we are talking here so far, again, a lot of them are more conceptual, right? So I'm talking all of them, all of the above, but we like to see net energy, right? All right, what else we got here, everyone? Isa from Colombia. Hi, Isa. Full feeding, what's your view? Lucerne is similar to alfalfa. Thanks. Ben, I'm not super, I don't have experience with alfalfa, so let us know your thoughts there. But again, that review that I mentioned, there's like 12 or 14 fiber types. And it's interesting to dig that data by fiber type and see, you know, because some of the things I mentioned here today on those averages, again, it's an average across all these 14 fiber types, okay? And I know they do have alfalfa on that one. Hi, Dr. Nick Gabler. How are you? You are the one that clarified here on alfalfa. Thank you. David, in late gestation, we need to look at the efficiency of amino acid digestion. As requirements increase and level stays the same, then digestibility may also increase, but by how much? As requirements increase and levels stay the same. I'm trying to understand what you say. Are you saying as the requirement increases over time as we have more total born, or requirements just throughout gestation, right? And I don't know what you mean by the level stay the same. So I guess you're saying that the level of the feed, the lysine per day stay the same, but the requirement is increasing. Yeah, so this is an interesting concept, right? In amino acid requirement studies, as you get closer to the requirement, the efficiency, to my knowledge, and again, anyone, a lot of bright people here tonight, correct me if I'm saying anything wrong, but as far as I recall, you get close to the requirement, it gets less efficient. So if you are 5% below requirement, it's going to be more efficient if you are at the requirement, for example. Okay, so with that, you talk about, okay, all right, keep them coming. Okay, crude, where we are here, energy in finishing. So very interesting study, a few studies recently, large scale studies, and fairly comfortable with this. But again, as some of these things in pig production, it's going to be very system specific. For example, I think a lot of you know when you add 1% added fat, you might get 2% in feed efficiency. But when it comes to growth, it might be for 1% added fat, it might be 0 growth, or might be 1% growth, right? So that's that. But when you look at energy as a whole, very recent study in Canada, 2,000 pigs. You know, when you go above, we're going to talk about that later when we touch on tail biting. So I'm going to save that for that.